Hey, let's do it for the content. Mega Ran. Let's go. Let's get it. Dick Kick City. It gets gritty when Mega Ran come through. The kid gets busy. Work yourself into a shoot, but you know it's legit. Like what you like, just don't be a dick. Hey, wrestling with regret. Let's get it. Yeah. What's that set? Maybe you should bottle it. Drink it and spray it on. Get Claude to model it. 8 years in, can't look back. Who else can make the little sweatsuits look whack? Wrestling with regret. Let's get it. Yeah.
Folks, the time is almost upon us. We are just days away. It's Wrestlemania, baby. No matter how you feel about this year's event going into things, I always feel there's a big level of excitement and, dare I say, a little bit of magic every year around this time, especially when it comes to the WWE Hall of Fame, and especially this year since The Undertaker is finally getting his due. Sure, the dead man's done more to damage his reputation the last few years than to help it, but no one can deny the impact and the legacy he left on WWE and pro wrestling as a whole. He inspired countless fans and wrestlers alike with his unique presentation, his evolving style, and of course his vaunted WrestleMania streak was a major selling point of the granddaddy of them all for several years, giving us some all-time classics. But when you appear in 27 of the 37 Manias to date with a variety of opponents and your own health complications, you're going to have a broad range of quality in those matches. And this week, as The Undertaker prepares to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, I'm going to rank them. From worst to best, here are all The Undertaker's WrestleMania matches. Until he comes back for one more, I guess. Number 27, The Undertaker versus the Big Boss Man, WrestleMania 15. You know what, I think I and everyone else owe Giant Gonzalez a huge apology. Don't worry, he's coming up real soon, but he does not deserve the distinction of being Mean Mark's worst Mania opponent. The first Hell in a Cell match in Mania history is also known as possibly the worst cell match of all time, a plotting brawl that mostly took place outside the ring, but not outside the cell. Boring! Then the match wrapped up less than a minute after they finally got back in the ring. Oh yeah, did I mention this was heel versus heel? Woohoo, what a battle! And let's not forget the symbolic hanging after the bell. The showcase of the immortals, everyone! Number 26, The Undertaker versus John Cena, WrestleMania 34. In more recent years, John Cena was considered a real fantasy opponent for The Undertaker. They wrestled once or twice in the mid-2000s, but by Mania 34, they were entirely different people. On paper, this match could have been huge. Well, what the fans in New Orleans got instead was a zippy match featuring the greatest hits and not much else before the dead man put Cena away with a single tombstone piledriver. But who can blame Cena for not being prepared as he began the night as a fan? As easy as it is to blame WWE for the slapdash build, from what we've learned on the last ride and so forth, maybe it wasn't all their fault this time. Keeping it short and sweet saved The Undertaker from another embarrassment like his match the previous year in Orlando, but it squandered the opportunity for what could have been an all-time match. Number 25, The Undertaker versus Giant Gonzalez, WrestleMania 9. See, I said you wouldn't have to wait too long. Don't get me wrong, it's still bad, but the match at Caesar's Palace has been somewhat redeemed as I've worked on this project. At least it told some kind of story, and Taker had enough athleticism and charisma to make up for Elegante's shortcomings. I wasn't even mad about the DQ finish, because at least Taker still ended the night looking somewhat strong. It isn't the worst, but it's still pretty god-awful. Number 24, The Undertaker versus Psycho Sid, WrestleMania 13. The Undertaker won the WWE or World titles at 3 different WrestleManias, and although this match at Mania 13 was the first of such occasions, it was also the worst. A somewhat sloppy brawl that was interrupted by Bret Hart no fewer than 3 times doesn't exactly scream Mania main event to me, and certainly didn't do anything to help save the show from being considered one of the worst ever. No, that credit belongs to Hart and Steve Austin only. And while the rumor persists that Sid allegedly crapped his trunks in the match, it has been debunked. I mean, the match was shitty enough on its own, it didn't need the real stuff. Number 23, The Undertaker versus Jimmy Snuka, WrestleMania 7. They say you never forget your first time, and while it certainly holds true here, maybe it wouldn't hurt to forget a little bit of it. It's easy to look back at this glorified squash match at the start of that legendary streak, but in the moment, it was a short, so-so match where they botched the finish. But at least Taker looked okay in his first WrestleMania, and the crowd dug it. And though they try to downplay it now, man, they were trying to get those ham hocks over.
Look at that ham. Look at the size of that ham hock.
Number 22, The Undertaker versus King Kong Bundy, WrestleMania 11. When it comes to wrestling men as large or larger than him, The Undertaker was always hit or miss. And though this match was by no means his worst Mania encounter, it was on one of the worst Manias of all time. So Taker did the best he could with a guy who rarely left his feet, and him slamming Bundy just before the finish was impressive. We've seen the big sit-up and comeback in the past, but that whole reunion with the urn moment made it look like a video game power-up come to life. The match was a lot more competent than, say, Gonzalez, for example, but was still not the business. Number 21, The Undertaker vs. Mark Henry, WrestleMania 22. It's The Undertaker's one and only casket match at Mania. It's a fairly academic match. The dead man never really seems to be in much trouble and wins handily. There is a scary moment where Taker whiffs his dive to the outside, not unlike what would happen 4 years later against Shawn Michaels. And unlike the match against Bundy, the world's strongest man actually went up for the tombstone, which is pretty damn cool. Number 20, The Undertaker vs. Roman Reigns, WrestleMania 33. By the end of his run, The Undertaker was often put in matches that were honestly booked longer than what his body could support. This match not only exposed that fact the most, but came at the worst possible time for his opponent. At this point, it's fair to say that Roman Reigns did not have the support of the WWE Universe, despite the company's best efforts. Facing the eternally beloved Undertaker on the biggest show of the year didn't do him any favors, and the crowd refused to get behind him in Orlando. But then the crowd was put in an awkward situation when the Undertaker started to wrestle like 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag. Seeing him fall and have a hard time getting up, both for real and as part of the story, made it hard to watch for a lot of the time. And I should know, because I was there and didn't care much for it. This no-holds-barred match was seemingly designed to get Roman over as the new big dog, but all it ended up doing was exposing that The Undertaker was apparently no longer ready for prime time. And boy, it's too bad they wasted this moment at the end of the show. Number 19, The Undertaker vs. The Big Show and A-Train, WrestleMania 19. 19 is 19th. That's neat. If you've watched me long enough, you know I've got a soft spot in my heart for WrestleMania 19. The first Mania I attended, only a few hours away from my hometown, my two favorite wrestlers in the main event, this was for the most part a killer show. Taker was meant to partner with newcomer Nathan Jones until WWE made the shocking discovery that he wasn't very good, hence this 2-on-1 situation. The match wasn't the best of the night by any means, but it wasn't bad either. If anyone knew how to put on a decent hoss match, it was Big Show, Albert, and a very yoked Undertaker. In the end, the Colossus of Boggo Road came in to help his mentor win the match, yet nobody was disqualified. Not as good a run-in as the guest appearance by an actual train.
Oh, look at this. Gut-wrench suplex connects.
Number 18, The Undertaker vs. Brock Lesnar, WrestleMania 30. The match that ended the streak, one of the most polarizing and hotly debated outcomes in the history of WrestleMania. It's just too bad the match itself wasn't all that great. It didn't help that The Undertaker got his bell rung at some point in the match, but unless it was from his very first bump, I don't know how the rest could have been so boring and hard to watch at times. Keep in mind, this is before Lesnar began the whole Suplex City thing, which made his character a lot more fun to watch for a bit. They didn't even have that to go off of. The match may have been brutal, but I will die on the hill that Taker losing and the immediate reaction is one of the coolest, most surreal WrestleMania moments of all time, which is why it ranks so high on this list. The pop into the stunned silence, the announcers laying out, the crowd shots, I mean, that moment is iconic. WrestleMania 30 was memorable for so many positive reasons, and in my view, you gotta have a little bit of tragedy in an epic now and then. Number 17, The Undertaker vs. Jake Roberts, WrestleMania 8. What a difference a year had made for The Undertaker. Listening to the crowd reactions for him between Manias 7 and 8 are like night and day, as fans finally embraced Taker as a babyface against the cunning and devious Jacob the Snake-Up. The match was a foregone conclusion, but what I really liked about it more than anything was Jake's body language throughout, as he realized that his plans and mind games weren't doing the trick and was preparing for his just desserts. Working babyface gave a whole new dimension to the dead man's character, and his program with Jake culminating at WrestleMania was the perfect coming out party. Number 16, The Undertaker vs. Bray Wyatt, WrestleMania 31. Until he was released last year, it seemed that Bray Wyatt was poised to become WWE's next magical, spooky wrestler, making him, in theory, an ideal opponent for the dead man. But in actuality, it was the right match at the wrong time. Wyatt's huge push the previous year faltered after he lost to John Cena, and Taker had been a ghost since falling to Lesnar the previous year. There was really no issue between them besides one arguing he was a scarier wrestler than the other. It was one of the laziest stock Undertaker match builds ever, and the match was equally uninspired. It was better than Taker's loss in New Orleans, but hearing the "you've still got it" chants in the opening minutes had to sting a little. Number 15, The Undertaker vs. Shane McMahon, WrestleMania 32. Ah yes, the match that made no sense for Taker to even be in, a match with no serious consequences after the fact, the infamous Lockbox match. The third and most recent cell match in WrestleMania history, it was also Shane's first match back in about 7 years, so you can imagine there was going to be some ring rust there. Them making the match no DQ and putting it in a cage that was hard to look into was them literally trying to hide the inherent weaknesses that would be found in the match, and I guess they did an adequate job of doing that. It was a fun enough return for Shane as he busted out all the hits and some of the misses, but the match ultimately did nothing for Taker. The best part of the whole thing was the entire arena going crazy when Shane simply looked up to the top of the cell. Goosebumps. Number 14, The Undertaker vs. Kane, WrestleMania 20. For good or for bad, when it comes to making big emotional moments at WrestleMania, few have done it quite like The Undertaker. Kind of like how his loss to Lesnar at WrestleMania 30 cast a dark cloud over the rest of the show, his rebirth and return as the Dead Man 10 years earlier was one of WrestleMania 20's biggest emotional high points. At the previous Survivor Series, Kane buried his brother alive, spelling the end of the Biker-Taker era. The return of the Dead Man and Paul Bearer was a very well done and well built angle, executed to perfection in Madison Square Garden. This thing was a nostalgia rush, but with a step toward a new era for The Undertaker. Though this match wasn't as sloppy as their first Mania encounter, it also lacked a lot of the drama or suspense. I mean, Kane only went down to one tombstone that year, for God's sake. Number 13, The Undertaker vs. Kane, WrestleMania 14. Speaking of their Mania 14 encounter, here it is. Like I mentioned, the match was not pretty and got downright scary at moments, but God do I love how epic this whole thing was. Brother versus brother, demigod versus demigod, a whole new world of depth added to The Undertaker's character that made sense, that was accepted by the fans, culminating in this titanic battle, accompanied by oh frickin' Fortuna and a grove of druids. Yeah, I googled it. It was the first time Taker's powers were truly tested, almost blow for blow, and the visual of Kane almost kicking out of a third tombstone, that kept him a threat for a long time to come. By the way, 10 out of 10 stretcher job on Pete Rose, and shout out to the head druid who is chewing gum. Number 12, The Undertaker vs. Diesel, WrestleMania 12. Well, looky there, another fun ranking. After fighting off monsters and ghouls in 2 of the last 3 years, this match had to be considered a reward of some sort, as the Dead Man and Big Daddy Cool were 2 of the pillars during a very stressful time for the company. For the first time in his Mania career, Taker was matched with an opponent who was a legitimate main eventer, a former world champion who could match him in most areas. And these two really brought it too, certainly the Undertaker's fastest paced Mania match at that point. We do get the ugliest chokeslam of all time until Hulk Hogan would take that crown in 2002, but besides that it's a damn solid match. Too bad we get the opposite of that 1 year later. As Diesel was on his way out of the company, Taker's victory ushered in a new, more serious direction for his character, as Mankind would attack him the next day on Raw and set off their memorable feud. Number 11, The Undertaker vs. Ric Flair, WrestleMania 18. Everyone talks about the epic matchup between Hogan and The Rock that year, but the Hulkster was not the only middle-aged man who was threatening to steal the show. And if you want to get technical, it's arguable that The Undertaker and Flair had the better match in the Skydome. Rick was like an old gunslinger out for one last fight, avenging the honor of Arn Anderson and David Flair, both of whom Taker had assaulted to goad Nate into fighting him. While Hogan and Rock was a masterclass in crowd interaction and pure charisma, this is an old-school, gritty brawl that would have fit perfectly as the main event in one of those smoke-filled arenas from back in the day. Taker stayed one step ahead of Flair and beat him after a bloody battle. At 10-0, this win marked one of the earliest times the streak had been mentioned with any sort of regularity. Number 10, The Undertaker vs. Randy Orton, WrestleMania 21. Unlike his previous year's match against Kane, or any of his other 10 previous opponents for that matter, it seemed to be the first time The Undertaker's streak was seriously threatened. Orton was the legend killer after all, and was in need of some career rehab after a face turn nobody asked for. The two had an absolutely awesome match, one of Taker's best at the time and one of Orton's best ever, but in the end they went with the safe bet and The Undertaker's streak lived on. But don't worry, that Randy Orton kid still turned out decent. Number 9, The Undertaker vs. Triple H, WrestleMania 27. In the grand scheme of things, the second installment in the Triple H Undertaker WrestleMania trilogy is the most forgettable, which is ironic considering it was one of the best matches of that night. I mean, when you're competing with such gems as Michael Cole versus Jerry Lawler and John Cena versus The Miz, it's not too hard to stand out. And the H-Man certainly did his job, convincing us on several occasions that this just might be the end of the streak. But by the end, it just became a parade of finisher kickouts before a dramatic tap-out to the Hell's Gate. Number 8, The Undertaker vs. Batista, WrestleMania 23. Okay, so remember the stuff I told you I liked in the match with Diesel at WrestleMania 12? Two athletic big guys working at a relatively brisk pace? Well, this was like that match, only better. There isn't much clever I can say or write to elaborate on it. It was a big hoss fight, each man doing some impressive stuff you wouldn't normally see out of them. Taker wins the world title from the Animal in a hell of a main event and increases his streak to 15-0. Number 7, The Undertaker vs. Triple H, WrestleMania 17. This one's considered an all-time classic between them, which makes it all the more praiseworthy when you realize just how little notice they had to get a feud started before this match. It's probably the 4th best match on the show, which says everything you need to know about the greatness of this particular WrestleMania. Sure, the enforcement of the rules went a little sideways when they brawled into the crowd, and the crash pad that was visible after Triple H's big fall kinda killed the illusion, but it was still a fun fight and a great taste of what was to come from each man, especially at Mania. Number 6, The Undertaker vs. Triple H, WrestleMania 28. 4 years into the saga between The Undertaker and the collective D-Generation X, things got really heated and intense, and there was still a chance the streak could possibly end, which ultimately made what happened at WrestleMania 30 feel even more anticlimactic. It was a great setup. The two guys who've been in more Hell in a Cell matches than anyone duking it out one last time with Shawn Michaels as the guest referee, ever the wild card. Of their 3 matches at Mania, I consider this one the best, thanks in large part to that great storytelling between all 3 participants. As disingenuous as the end of an era billing turned out to be, the match was more than worthy of being on WrestleMania. That super kick pedigree kick-out sequence has to be one of the most convincing false finishes of all time. It was a classic example of what a well-executed, if somewhat overproduced, WWE big match strives to be, the kind of high drama they have kept trying to replicate to this very day. Number 5, The Undertaker vs. AJ Styles, WrestleMania 36. Man, that early pandemic era of WWE was strange times indeed. Everyone flying by the seat of their pants, no idea what wrestling would look like in the future, but they did have a sorta kinda glimpse at the present. Look, not all the cinematic matches of 2020 were amazing, but they served a purpose and at least kinda shook up a very stale TV presentation. But of all the mini-movies, few could match the quality, the story, and the entertainment value of WrestleMania 36's Boneyard match. I think what makes this match so great is just how different it is compared to the rest of his work. I know it's stating the obvious, but when you get right down to it, so many of these Mania matches all blend together. I mean, the last dozen or so alone have all had someone on commentary say the phrase "best pure striker" in the first 15 seconds. So many ref bumps, so many finisher kickouts, and so on and so on. After years and years of that, for what would become his final WrestleMania match to be done in this completely different way was downright refreshing. Aside from that, it was a great story and it played to Taker's strength as a brawler. He hardly had to leave his feet and got to look awesome in victory thanks to clever editing. Honestly, he should have had more matches like this. Number 4, The Undertaker vs. Edge, WrestleMania 24. By 2008, both Taker and Edge were hitting huge strides. This was the peak of The Undertaker's career renaissance after his rebirth 4 years earlier, and for Edge, as of press time, this was arguably his greatest singles match at WrestleMania. It was a competitive battle from bell to bell and gave us a small preview of the close calls we'd go on to see for the next few years. Taker himself has personally ranked Edge behind only Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels as opponents he meshed the best with, and this match definitely proved that. As great as this match is, it's held back by the inevitability of the finish. With Ric Flair retiring and Randy Orton winning the WWE title earlier in the night, there's no way the fans weren't going home happy, especially with the streak on the line. Number 3, The Undertaker vs. CM Punk, WrestleMania 29. After 4 straight years of ever-increasing drama and stakes and emotion and inner conflict between The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels and Triple H, it was nice just for once for the Lord of Darkness to beat somebody up for being a prick. Though Paul Bearer's sudden death of a heart attack just weeks before Mania 29 was indeed tragic, the family allowed the real-life loss to be used for Punk to gain heat in the feud, that uncomfortable flirtation with the limits of good taste. Punk used Bearer's death against Taker, dumped ashes onto him, he wore the black and purple, he did the old school, he was a walking mind game. His motivations were shallow and petty, his methods vile, making him the perfect foil. The match itself told a great story with a dynamic we hadn't seen in years, not some grizzled veteran trying to conquer an evil force, just a snarky guy with an attitude and the desire to beat The Undertaker in the cheapest way possible because it'll count either way. What a concept. Even Paul Heyman gets physical in this thing, which is pretty darn rare. It's a fun match with a hot crowd, a very enjoyable encounter for what would become CM Punk's final WrestleMania. Number 2, The Undertaker vs. Shawn Michaels, WrestleMania 26, making 25 my pick for the best. But wait a minute, you might be asking, haven't I gone on record before saying 26 was the better match? Let's play it back. And the number 1 best WrestleMania match of all time is Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker, WrestleMania 26. Yeah, I definitely said that at some point. I don't know, maybe it is better, or maybe 25 is better. I don't know. It's hard for me to pick one or the other on any given day, it seems. It seems like a cop-out, but in the end, either of them work for me as number 1. Like I said way back in that countdown, what put 26 over the edge for me at the time was the bigger stakes, the greater amount of emotion and effort put forth. And while those things are still true, I think the one at 25 was just more fun to watch in a way. Because it was the first of the two, it felt more novel. There were no real expectations because the last time those two had fought on pay-per-view, they were entirely different people. But they picked right back up where they left off and managed to up their game to a ridiculous level, especially Taker. No disrespect to Mr. Calloway, but these matches don't rank as high if he's going against anyone else. The physicality, the drama, the body language, the emotion, the commentary, these two matches had it all. I don't think you'll ever get me to settle on one match over the other, but I suppose at this precise moment in time, I'm picking 25 over 26 as my top 2 Undertaker WrestleMania matches. So what do you think of this list? How would you rank the matches? I want to hear what you all have to say in the comment section below. Congratulations to The Undertaker and the rest of the Hall of Fame class. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.
This Mania weekend in Dallas, join Brian Zane and special guests Alex, Queen of the Ring, Mr. Ooh La La, and Darren Corbin for a live screening and riffing of American Angels, Baptism of Blood, part of the GCW World Fair at Fair Park. For tickets and info, visit regret.brownpapertickets.com.